Good morning, friends. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus asks a rather prudent question. He asks, "And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life?" If you want to talk about brass tacks, bottom line, practical wisdom, here it is. Jesus is encouraging his people to trust in the Lord and not succumb to anxiety, and to do this in the midst of all the other reasons he's already given to us, so that we're going to talk about this Sunday, by reminding us of this simple little fact. Our anxiety, our worry cannot do anything to help us in any case. That is the basic message. The context here is the people's anxieties over what they will eat, what they will drink, what they'll wear, and really, lest we forget, this is a society where starvation and exposure to the elements was a very real possibility if the harvest was bad, or if thieves or outright enemies plundered your village and burned things down, and so on. And that's important for us to remember, because sometimes we might be in positions to worry about paying our bills. But even for the poorest amongst us, there are so many social safety nets in our society, from food pantries to, even in the most dire straits, homeless shelters, that even for the completely destitute among us today, death isn't really a concern, at least not from lack of food and shelter. It's not. But it truly was a concern for the folks living there in that ancient world. Really, it's been a constant concern for most of human history, including today, depending on where it is you're living in the world. And so the kind of anxiety that Jesus is addressing here is the kind that has to do with, will I live or will I die? Which makes his rhetorical question just that much more powerful. Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Because that's the issue. Will we have food to live? Will we have shelter so that we can live? And yet, will being anxious about these things actually help you to do them? Will being anxious actually give you life? And of course, the answer is a resounding no. Which leads me to a related question, and what I really hope we can focus in on today, which is the question, who has the power over how long we live anyway? Who is the one that has the power over our life? Is it not the Lord? The Apostle Paul teaches that God gives to all mankind life and breath. King David writes about God in the Psalm, saying, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." And Job addresses God about the lives of men, saying, since his days are determined, and the number of his months is with you, and you have appointed his limits that he cannot pass. You see, it's not just that we can't add any time to our lives on this earth, though it's an important point that Job says here, that God has set limits to our life, and we are not going to be able to break through those limits. We are not going to live longer than what God has determined. In light of this, we need to realize that, yes, we are powerless, yet God is powerful. That he has already determined the span of our lives. He gives us each breath. Each breath you draw, yes, is it because of your lungs and bodily functions? Yes, but ultimately, each breath comes from him. If he wants your lungs to stop, your heart to stop, or whatever, all he has to do is stop sustaining you. In any case, he gives us each breath. He gives us our days. The lengths of our days on this earth are already written. They're already set as if written down in a book. And this means, yes, that God has set the moment of your death, of my death, and we cannot change that. Not to make it farther in the future, as most people would think that they'd want, nor to make it sooner. Now think on that. We will not pass away. We will not die until our appointed time. And when it's our appointed time, we will, and cannot prolong it. And for many people in the world who do not have faith in Christ, who don't understand the goodness of God and his sovereignty, for those folks, this truth will be responded to with a certain fatalism. As soon as people realize that things are indeed outside their own control, out of their hands, they tend to default to fatalism, the idea that nothing is worth it then, which only demonstrates all the more how inward focused we are, that if we aren't in charge, then nothing is worthwhile. When really just the opposite is true, as I hope that we've been learning. When we are willing to submit to the reality that God is in charge, then that is where real worth and purpose and meaning actually comes from. That is where stability and contentment and peace come from as well. Because there's no reason to worry when we know that God is in control. He's the one with the power anyway. We can't add a single hour to our lives by worry or through anxiety because God has already established how long our lives are going to be. And again, to many in the world, that's a horrible idea. But for those of us who know God, who recognize his trustworthiness, his absolute faithfulness, and his essential goodness, could there be any better news than that when it comes to the length of your life? To know that your life will not be cut short. Whenever somebody dies tragically or for pretty much any reason other than long, old age, people will talk about their life being cut short. But it is actually impossible for our lives to be cut short, particularly when you think about it, God's people. Because to have your life cut short is to insinuate that God's plan for you was forced to end prematurely, that God was not able to accomplish in your life all that he desired to accomplish. But that is just not reality. No one can alter God's plans. And the plans he has for his people are all good, and he will see them through. So let's remember who has the power, and the uselessness, the foolishness, the downright silliness we engage in when we let anxiety for the future overwhelm us. We serve a God who has it all under control. Do you trust him in that knowledge? You should, because he is supremely worthy of trust. But even as I say that you should trust him, I have to admit that this is something I have to keep in mind as well. It's easy for any of us, all of us, to be distracted, to start thinking you've got to do things in your own power, and then without realizing, all of a sudden you're trusting in your own ability instead of God's, and that's when anxiety and fear and worry really make their way in. But we need to resist and keep those things away by keeping at the very forefront of our mind that we are powerless. So don't trust in ourselves, but God is powerful and perfectly worthy of that trust. Whether it's about our lives, our deaths, our comforts, our trials, whatever it might be, God is in control. And that truth is really all we need to do, all we need to stand on in order to banish anxiety and fear and worry far, far away. I love you guys. Have a good and godly day, and Lord willing, I'll see you soon.